A forgotten Civil War battlefield map, buried beneath decades of neglect, hidden coordinates pointing to a site that would rewrite American history, one desperate single mother's $600 gamble on a foreclosed ranch before losing custody of her children. This is the extraordinary true story of how Maria Santos's impulsive bid on abandoned land uncovered a cartographic treasure that would attract the National Archives, challenge established historical narratives, and transform not just her family's destiny, but an entire region's understanding of a pivotal moment in American warfare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The piercing sound of Maria Santos's phone alarm cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30 a.m., though she had been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of their cramped motel room. At 29, the exhausted single mother bore the weight of 18 months of relentless struggle since her ex-husband abandoned them, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. The custody hearing loomed just 6 weeks away, where she would face a judge who would determine whether she could provide adequate housing for 8-year-old Sophia and 5-year-old Diego. Maria rolled quietly from the lumpy mattress, careful not to wake her children who shared the single bed beside hers. The Sunset Motor Lodge in Millbrook, Texas, had become their temporary home for the past 3 weeks after being evicted from their apartment. At $47 per night, it was eating through her savings faster than she could replenish them through her part-time shifts at the local diner and weekend cleaning jobs. She pulled on her worn waitress uniform and stepped into the tiny bathroom, avoiding her reflection in the cracked mirror. The woman staring back no longer resembled the confident marketing coordinator she had once been at a thriving Austin tech company. That life felt like someone else's dream now, erased by corporate downsizing, divorce proceedings that drained her savings, and the harsh reality of trying to rebuild with 2 young children depending on her for everything. The motel's flickering, fluorescent light illuminated a stack of legal documents on the dresser. Child custody evaluation forms, employment verification requirements, and housing stability assessments. Her ex-husband's lawyer had made their strategy clear: demonstrate that Maria couldn't provide a stable environment for the children. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man who had contributed nothing to their support for over a year was now using her struggles as ammunition to gain custody, likely motivated more by avoiding child support payments than genuine concern for their welfare. Maria counted the crumpled bills in her wallet. $237. After tonight's motel payment, she would have enough for perhaps 3 more nights before facing the terrifying prospect of sleeping in her 15-year-old Honda Civic with both children. The car that had already broken down twice this month, requiring repairs she couldn't afford, draining funds she desperately needed for housing deposits. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Carmen in El Paso. "Mom says you can all come. Stay here while you get back on your feet. The kids could finish the school year here." The offer was generous, but accepting meant admitting complete defeat. It meant uprooting Sophia and Diego from the only stability they had left, their school. And friends in Millbrook, it meant starting over in a city where she had no job prospects, no support network beyond family charity. More troubling, it meant potentially losing the custody case entirely. Her ex-husband's legal team would certainly argue that fleeing to another city demonstrated instability and inability to maintain consistent living arrangements for the children. The judge might view it as abandonment of established residency, giving primary custody to their father, who had remained in the area despite contributing nothing to their daily care. As Maria prepared instant coffee with the motel's inadequate hot plate, she reviewed her impossible situation. Her credit was destroyed from missed payments during the divorce proceedings. Landlords required first and last month's rent plus security deposits that totaled more than she earned in 2 months. Every apartment application was rejected due to her employment history gap and insufficient income verification. The diner job provided steady work but minimal hours. Sarah's hometown cafe could only offer her 25 hours per week at minimum wage, plus tips that rarely exceeded $50 weekly. The cleaning service provided weekend work, but the physical demands left her exhausted for her primary job. Even working 7 days a week, she barely earned enough to cover the motel costs, let alone save for an apartment deposit. Sophia stirred in the bed, her dark eyes opening to survey their temporary surroundings with the resigned acceptance that broke Maria's heart daily. At 8 years old, her daughter had learned not to ask when they would have their own home again, understanding somehow that such questions only added to her mother's visible stress. "Morning, mija," Maria whispered, smoothing Sophia's tangled hair. "Remember, Mrs. Peterson from school will pick you up after my shift today." "Are we moving today?" Sophia asked quietly, the question she asked every morning despite Maria's repeated explanations about their temporary situation. "Not today, baby, but soon we'll find the perfect place for us." The promise felt hollow, even as she spoke it. Maria had viewed dozens of rental properties over the past month, each one either beyond her financial reach or requiring background checks and employment verification that eliminated her candidacy immediately. Property managers looked at her with undisguised skepticism when she explained her situation, clearly viewing a motel address and gap in employment history as red flags. Diego woke with his characteristic enthusiasm, immediately bouncing on the bed and chattering about the cartoons he wanted to watch. At 5, he remained largely oblivious to their precarious circumstances, treating their motel stay as an extended adventure. His innocent questions about when they would have their own kitchen again or when he could invite friends over to play served as constant reminders of everything Maria had failed to provide. Preparing and narrating this story took a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After getting the children ready and walking them to the school bus stop, Maria drove to Sarah's hometown cafe for her morning shift. The 20-minute drive gave her precious time to think, to strategize, to hope for solutions that seemed increasingly elusive. The radio played cheerful morning programming while she calculated and recalculated her finances, searching for mathematical miracles that never materialized. The diner buzzed with its usual breakfast crowd of local ranchers, construction workers, and retirees who gathered for coffee and conversation. Maria moved efficiently between tables, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and maintaining the cheerful demeanor that earned her the modest tips essential to their survival. Her co-workers knew nothing of her housing situation, believing she lived in one of the apartments across town. During her break, Maria sat in her car, reviewing online classified ads on her phone, hoping to find a rental possibility she had somehow missed. The pickings were slim in Millbrook, a small Texas town where affordable housing meant mobile homes or rundown apartments that still required deposits she couldn't accumulate. A foreclosure auction notice caught her attention, buried among the usual apartment listings. Foreclosure auction, Monday 10 a.m., Hartwell Ranch property, 127 acres, minimum bid, $500. The listing included a grainy photograph of a single-story ranch house surrounded by overgrown pasture land. The description was minimal. Property sold as is, no inspections, cash only, possession immediately upon closing. Maria studied the listing with growing interest. The minimum bid was within her financial reach, barely. If the bidding stayed low, she might actually be able to purchase property instead of throwing money away on motel rooms. The idea was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. She had no experience with real estate auctions, no knowledge of what amaze might entail, and no backup plan if the property proved uninhabitable. Yet the alternative was equally frightening. Continued motel living would exhaust her remaining savings within weeks, leaving them homeless and vulnerable to losing custody of the children. At least property ownership would demonstrate stability to the court, even if the property required significant work. During her lunch break, Maria drove to the address listed in the foreclosure notice. Hartwell Ranch sat at the end of a dusty county road 15 miles outside Millbrook proper. The house appeared structurally sound from the outside, though clearly neglected for several years. Peeling paint, overgrown landscaping and boarded windows suggested abandonment, but the roof looked intact and the foundation appeared solid. The property's isolation was both attractive and concerning. 127 acres would provide incredible space for the children to play and explore, but the distance from town meant additional challenges for school transportation and her work commute. The nearest neighbor appeared to be over a mile away, visible only as a distant farmhouse across rolling pastureland. Maria walked around the perimeter of the house, peering through gaps in the boarded windows. The interior appeared to contain furniture covered in sheets, suggesting the previous owners had simply walked away rather than removing their belongings. From what she could observe, the house seemed to include multiple bedrooms, a large living area, and what appeared to be a spacious kitchen. The land stretched in all directions, marked by old fence lines and dotted with mature oak trees. A small barn stood near the house, its metal roof showing rust but structural integrity. Several outbuildings suggested the property had once been a working ranch, though no livestock remained. A windmill in the distance indicated water well access, potentially eliminating monthly utility costs that strained her budget. As Maria explored the property, she discovered remnants of the ranch's history. Old farming equipment partially hidden by tall grass, stone markers that might have indicated property boundaries, and what appeared to be the foundation of an older structure near a grove of ancient oak trees. The sense of history and permanence appealed to her after months of temporary living situations. The more she explored, the more the property seemed to offer exactly what her family needed: space, privacy, potential for self-sufficiency, and, most importantly, permanent housing that would satisfy the court's stability requirements. The auction represented a chance to transform their desperate situation into something resembling security. Returning to work for her afternoon shift, Maria researched foreclosure auctions on her phone during quiet periods. The process seemed straightforward. Attend the auction, bring cash or certified funds, bid against other interested parties, and potentially walk away as property owner. The risks were significant, but seemed manageable compared to their current trajectory toward homelessness. That evening, after picking up the children and returning to the motel, Maria called the number listed for the auction company. A cheerful representative explained the basic procedures, confirmed the minimum bid amount, and mentioned that properties in that area often sold close to starting bids due to limited local interest. "It's pretty remote out there," the woman explained. "Most folks looking for ranch property want something closer to the main highway, but for someone looking for privacy and space, it's a beautiful piece of land." Privacy and space, exactly what Maria's family needed. After hanging up, she spent the evening researching the property's history online, discovering that Hartwell Ranch had been in the same family for over 60 years before financial difficulties forced the foreclosure. The previous owners had raised cattle and horses, operating a modest but successful ranch until health problems and mounting medical bills made continued operation impossible. Local property records indicated the ranch had sold for over $200,000 during better economic times, making the current minimum bid an extraordinary opportunity if the property remained structurally sound. Maria allowed herself to imagine the possibilities. Sofia and Diego running across acres of their own land, vegetable gardens, maybe even a few chickens for fresh eggs. The fantasy felt both impossible and tantalizingly within reach. As she tucked the children into their shared motel bed that night, Maria made her decision. She would attend the auction Monday morning, armed with her remaining savings and desperate hope that this abandoned ranch might offer the stability and security they desperately needed. "Mom," Sofia said quietly as Maria turned off the light, "I had a dream we lived in a big house with our own yard." "Maybe dreams come true sometimes, mija," Maria replied, her voice thick with emotion and determination. "Maybe they do." Outside their motel window, the lights of Millbrook twinkled in the distance, while somewhere beyond those lights, Hartwell Ranch waited in darkness, holding secrets and possibilities that would soon change everything for the Santos family in ways none of them could possibly imagine. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline Texas dawn that made even the most challenging days seem possible. Maria had been awake since 3 a.m., her mind cycling through every possible scenario for the auction ahead. She dressed carefully, in her best interview outfit, a navy blue blazer and slacks that she hoped would convey competence and seriousness to any other bidders who might question her presence at a property auction. The children sensed something different about this Monday morning. Sofia watched her mother with curious eyes as Maria packed their few belongings into neat piles, organizing everything they owned into 2 small suitcases and several grocery bags. Diego bounced excitedly on the motel bed, interpreting the unusual activity as the adventure his mother had promised for weeks. "Are we finally moving to our new house today?" he asked, his 5-year-old optimism infectious despite Maria's nervous energy. "We might be, mijo," Maria replied, checking her purse for the 3rd time to ensure she had her bank withdrawal receipt, identification, and the cashier's check she had obtained Saturday afternoon. $612, representing nearly everything they had left in the world. But first, Mama has to go to a special meeting where grown-ups decide who gets to buy the house. After dropping the children at school with their usual babysitter, Mrs. Chen, who had graciously agreed to extended hours without asking uncomfortable questions about Maria's housing situation, she drove toward the county courthouse where the auction would take place. The 20-minute drive felt simultaneously too long and too short, giving her mind time to oscillate between hope and terror. The courthouse parking lot contained fewer vehicles than Maria had expected, perhaps a dozen cars and trucks scattered across the expansive asphalt. She recognized several local contractors' vehicles, their tool-laden pickups, suggesting these men viewed the auction as business opportunities rather than desperate housing solutions. A sleek black SUV with government plates sat apart from the other vehicles, its tinted windows preventing identification of its occupants. Inside the courthouse's small auction room, Maria counted 11 other attendees seated in folding chairs, facing a podium where an elderly auctioneer shuffled through paperwork. Most appeared to be local businessmen or contractors, their casual conversations suggesting familiarity with the foreclosure auction process. Maria chose a seat in the back row, hoping to observe the proceedings before drawing attention to herself. The auctioneer, a weathered man named Bill Crawford according to the nameplate on his table, called the room to order promptly at 10 a.m. His voice carried the rhythmic cadence of someone who had conducted thousands of similar sales over decades of practice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have 7 properties on today's schedule, starting with Hartwell Ranch. 127 acres with existing structures, minimum bid $500. Property sold as is, no warranties, cash or certified funds required for immediate closing." Crawford held up a folder containing what appeared to be photographs and basic property information. Located on County Road 247, approximately 15 miles east of Millbrook. House built in 1967, renovated in 1985, includes main residence, barn, and several outbuildings. Property has been vacant for approximately 18 months following foreclosure proceedings. A contractor in the front row raised his hand. What's the condition of the structures? Any major damage or foundation issues? Property is sold as is, Crawford repeated. Bank makes no representations regarding condition. Buyers are responsible for their own inspections and any necessary repairs. However, I will note that according to the county assessor's office, the structures were in good condition as of the last official evaluation. Maria's heart rate increased as she realized the bidding would begin momentarily. Around her, several men examined documents and whispered among themselves, clearly experienced in evaluating properties for investment potential. She felt completely out of her depth, but reminded herself that her motivation differed fundamentally. From theirs, they sought profit opportunities while she sought survival. Bidding opens at $500, Crawford announced, his gavel poised above the podium. Do I hear 500? 3 hands went up immediately, including Maria's. The auctioneer's eyes briefly registered surprise at her participation, but continued professionally. I have 500. Do I hear 600? 2 hands remained raised, Maria's and a contractor wearing a company shirt, identifying him as Thompson Construction. 600 from the lady in the back. Do I hear 700? Thompson nodded, raising the bid to $700. Maria's stomach churned as she realized the bidding was already approaching her absolute maximum. She had exactly $612, leaving her only $12 of cushion. 700 from Thompson Construction. Do I hear 800? Maria hesitated, calculating rapidly. If she bid $800, she would have negative $188, making the purchase impossible. But if she didn't bid, she would lose this opportunity for property ownership and return to the motel with dwindling resources and diminishing hope. The room fell silent as Crawford waited for additional bids. Maria noticed several other attendees had stopped participating, apparently considering $700 the property's maximum value given its remote location and unknown condition. Going once at $700, Crawford called, his gavel raised. In that moment of suspended possibility, Maria experienced a clarity that cut through her fear and uncertainty. She thought of Sophia's quiet question about when they would have their own home, of Diego's innocent assumption that adventures always ended happily, of the custody hearing that would determine whether she could provide adequate stability for her children. 650, she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. Thompson turned in his seat to look at her, his expression curious rather than hostile. He appeared to be calculating whether the property was worth additional investment against an obviously determined competitor. 650 from the lady. Do I hear 700? Thompson shook his head slightly. Property's too remote for what I need, he said, loud enough for the room to hear. Good luck with it, ma'am. Going once at $650, going twice, sold to bidder number 7. Crawford's gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through Maria's entire being. In the space of 10 minutes, she had become a property owner, transforming from a homeless motel resident to the owner of 127 acres of Texas rangeland. The paperwork process took another hour, during which Maria completed forms she barely understood while trying to maintain composure. She signed documents transferring ownership, provided identification and banking information, and received a set of keys that felt impossibly significant in her trembling hands. As she walked from the courthouse toward her car, the magnitude of what she had accomplished began to settle into her consciousness. She owned land. She owned a house. her children would have their own bedrooms, their own yard, their own space to grow and explore. The custody hearing now seemed less threatening, as she could demonstrate stable housing and permanent residence. The drive to Hartwell Ranch felt different than her previous scouting visit. This time, she wasn't a curious observer, but an owner, someone with legal right to walk through every room, to plan improvements, to call this place home. The landscape seemed more beautiful, the isolation less concerning than liberating. Pulling into what was now her driveway, Maria sat in her car for several minutes, absorbing the reality of her situation. The ranch house sat exactly as she remembered, its weathered exterior hiding possibilities she could only begin to imagine. Behind the house, the barn and outbuildings suggested potential for gardens, workshops, maybe even small-scale agriculture that could supplement their income. She walked to the front door, inserted the key with ceremonial slowness, and stepped inside her new home for the first time. The interior exceeded her expectations, revealing spacious rooms with solid hardwood floors, large windows that would flood the space with natural light once unboarded, and architectural details that suggested quality construction. The main living area opened into a generous kitchen with vintage appliances that appeared functional despite their age. 3 bedrooms offered ample space for their family, while a 4th room could serve as an office or study area. Most remarkably, the house appeared to have been maintained reasonably well before abandonment, requiring cleaning and minor repairs rather than major renovation. As Maria explored room by room, she discovered evidence of the previous owners' lives. Family photographs still hung on walls, depicting generations of what appeared to be the Hartwell family at various ranch activities. Furniture remained covered but intact, suggesting the foreclosure had occurred suddenly, forcing the family to abandon their belongings along with their property. In the master bedroom, Maria found a dresser filled with vintage clothing, jewelry, and personal items that told stories of lives lived fully on this land. A cedar chest contained quilts, baby clothes, and photo albums documenting decades of family history. The intimate glimpse into previous residents' lives felt both intrusive and inspiring, evidence that this ranch had sheltered dreams and supported families for generations. The kitchen yielded the most practical discoveries. Cabinets contained dishes, cookware, and preserved foods that suggested the previous owners had lived simply but comfortably. A large pantry held canning jars, indicating the family had grown and preserved their own food. The vintage stove and refrigerator bore testing, but both appeared to function adequately. Outside, the barn revealed agricultural equipment, tools, and supplies that represented significant value beyond what Maria had paid for the entire property. Tractors, plows, and harvesting equipment suggested the ranch had operated as a working farm until recently. Hand tools, hardware, and building supplies indicated the previous owners had maintained and improved the property themselves. The real surprise waited in a smaller outbuilding near the main barn. Inside, Maria discovered what appeared to be an office or study, complete with filing cabinets, bookshelves, and a desk covered with papers. Unlike the main house, this space seemed frozen in time, as if someone had simply stepped away from their work intending to return shortly. The desk contained ranch operation records, financial documents, and correspondence spanning several decades. Maria felt uncomfortable examining private papers, but realized these documents now belonged to her as part of the property purchase. Among the routine business records, she noticed several items that seemed historically significant rather than operational. A collection of maps caught her attention, stored carefully in a flat file drawer beneath the desk. These weren't contemporary property surveys or agricultural planning documents, but historical maps depicting the region during different periods. Some appeared to date from the late 1800s, showing railroad routes, settlement patterns, and geographical features with remarkable detail. One map in particular drew her focus, stored separately from the others in a protective folder marked Historical. Documents, handle with care. The parchment appeared significantly older than the other materials, its edges yellowed and slightly brittle, despite careful preservation. Hand-drawn notations in faded ink marked specific locations across the regional landscape. As Maria examined the map more closely, she realized it depicted not the peaceful agricultural region she now knew, but the same area during a period of conflict. Battle positions, troop movements, and strategic locations were marked with military precision. A legend in the corner identified it as Battle of Mill Creek Crossing, October 1863, reconnaissance survey. The historical significance struck her immediately. This appeared to be an original Civil War battlefield map, documenting an engagement that she had never heard mentioned in local history. Mill Creek Crossing was only 5 miles from her new property, suggesting this ranch had witnessed or been adjacent to Civil War military activity. Further examination revealed additional details that increased the map's apparent importance. Notations indicated the positions of both Union and Confederate forces, supply routes, communication lines, and tactical considerations. Most intriguingly, several locations were marked with symbols whose meaning wasn't immediately clear, but which suggested hidden or strategic significance beyond the visible battlefield. Maria carefully photographed the map with her phone, recognizing that she had discovered something potentially valuable beyond its personal significance. Historical Civil War documents, particularly original battlefield maps, were highly sought after by museums, universities, and private collectors. This single document might represent more value than she had paid for the entire ranch. As she continued exploring the office, Maria found additional historical materials that seemed to relate to the map. Letters, newspaper clippings, and photographs suggested the previous property owners had been amateur historians, particularly interested in local Civil War history. A journal contained notes about battlefield archaeology, relic hunting, and correspondence with historical societies. The implications began to crystallize in Maria's mind. She had not simply purchased affordable housing, but had inadvertently acquired historically significant materials that could attract attention from researchers, government agencies, and collectors. The isolation that had made the property affordable suddenly seemed like a protective advantage, allowing her to carefully consider her options without external pressure. Her phone rang, startling her from contemplation of the historical documents. Sophia's school appeared on the caller ID, immediately triggering maternal anxiety about whether something had happened to her children. Mrs. Santos, this is Principal Morrison from Millbrook Elementary. Sophia's been asking everyone if you found a house today. She seems very excited about the possibility of moving. I wanted to check whether you needed any assistance with enrollment procedures if you're changing addresses. Maria smiled, realizing her daughter's excitement had been impossible to contain. Yes, we did find a house today, a ranch east of town. I'll need to update their records and arrange transportation. Wonderful news. The children have been concerned about your housing situation, though they've been very brave about it. Sophia mentioned you were staying at the Sunset Motor Lodge temporarily. The conversation reminded Maria that her children were waiting to learn whether their housing uncertainty had been resolved. In her excitement about the historical discovery, she had temporarily forgotten the primary purpose of her morning's activities. She was now a homeowner, able to provide stable housing for her family, able to face the custody hearing with confidence. After ending the call, Maria took a final walk through her new property before returning to collect her children. The afternoon. Sun cast long shadows across the pastureland, highlighting the natural beauty that would now surround their daily lives. The silence was profound, broken only by wind through the oak trees and distant cattle from neighboring ranches. As she drove back toward town, Maria's mind raced between practical considerations and the exciting possibilities represented by her historical discovery. She needed to arrange utility connections, transportation for the children's school attendance, and basic supplies for beginning their new life at the ranch. But she also needed to research the Civil War map carefully to understand what she had found and what it might mean for their future. The motel room that had represented temporary refuge for weeks now felt confining after the spaciousness of the ranch. As she packed their belongings for the final time, Maria explained to Sofia and Diego that they would be sleeping in their own house that night, in their own bedrooms, on their own land. The children's excitement was infectious, transforming the mundane task of packing into a celebration of new beginnings. Diego immediately began planning where he would build forts and explore adventures, while Sofia asked practical questions about school transportation and making new friends in their rural setting. As the sun set over Millbrook, Maria loaded their possessions into her Honda Civic for the short journey to their new home. The Sunset Motor Lodge receded in her rearview mirror, a symbol of temporary hardship that had led to unexpected opportunity. Ahead lay Hartwell Ranch, her property, her children's future, and historical secrets that would soon attract attention from far beyond their small Texas community. Their first night at Hartwell Ranch felt like stepping into a different universe. Sofia and Diego raced through the empty rooms, their voices echoing off hardwood floors as they claimed bedrooms and discovered hiding spots behind vintage furniture. Maria watched her children's unbridled joy with tears in her eyes, realizing she hadn't seen them this carefree since before the divorce proceedings began. The house came alive with their presence. Diego discovered a window seat in what became his bedroom, complete with built-in storage that seemed designed for a young boy's treasures. Sofia fell in love with a room featuring pale yellow walls and a reading nook beneath windows overlooking the pasture land. For the first time in months, her children went to sleep excited about tomorrow instead of anxious about where they would wake up. Maria spent that first evening making lists of immediate necessities while exploring more thoroughly the historical materials she had discovered. The Civil War map continued to fascinate her, its detailed markings suggesting knowledge that went far beyond casual documentation. Someone had invested considerable time and expertise in creating this battlefield survey, noting strategic positions with military precision. Using her phone's internet connection, Maria researched the Battle of Mill Creek Crossing, discovering virtually no historical records of such an engagement. Local history websites mentioned minor skirmishes in the area during 1863, but nothing approaching the scope suggested by her map's detailed battle formations and tactical notations. The absence of documented history made her discovery even more intriguing and potentially valuable. Tuesday morning brought practical challenges that grounded her excitement in immediate realities. The children needed transportation to school, a 40-minute round trip that would complicate her work schedule at the diner. The ranch's electrical system functioned adequately but needed updating, while the plumbing required attention in several areas. Most urgently, they needed basic groceries and supplies to establish functional household routines. At Sofia's insistence, Maria photographed both children standing proudly in front of their new home before driving them to school. The image would serve multiple purposes, documenting this milestone for their family memories and providing evidence of stable housing for the upcoming custody hearing. Her ex-husband's accusations of instability would be difficult to maintain when confronted, with photos of their children thriving on their own ranch property. The drive to Millbrook became a time for reflection and planning. Rural living presented logistical challenges Maria hadn't anticipated, but the benefits seemed to outweigh the complications. Her children would grow up with space, freedom, and connection to the land that urban environments couldn't provide. The isolation that might have concerned other single mothers felt protective to Maria, offering sanctuary from the judgmental scrutiny of neighbors and landlords. At the diner, her co-workers noticed her improved mood immediately. Sarah, the restaurant's owner, commented on Maria's obvious excitement as she described their new living situation in general terms. She mentioned purchasing ranch property at a foreclosure auction, but avoided details about the historical documents until she better understood their significance. During her lunch break, Maria drove to the Millbrook Public Library, hoping to research local Civil War history more thoroughly than her phone's limited internet access allowed. Librarian Janet Morrison, Principal Morrison's wife, proved invaluable in directing her toward regional historical resources. Civil War activity in this area was generally limited to supply line raids and minor cavalry skirmishes, Janet explained, pulling several reference books from the local history section. Most major engagements occurred farther east, but there were definitely Confederate and Union forces moving through this region during 1863 and 1864. Maria spent an hour reviewing historical texts, maps, and archived newspaper accounts from the Civil War period. The Battle of Mill Creek Crossing appeared in none of these official records, despite her map's detailed documentation of what seemed to be a significant military engagement. The discrepancy suggested either her map depicted a lesser-known encounter that had escaped historical documentation, or represented something more sensitive that had been deliberately omitted from public records. One reference caught her particular attention, a mention in a University of Texas dissertation about undocumented Civil War engagements in Central Texas. The author had identified several battles known through contemporary letters and diaries, but absent from official military records. Political sensitivities during Reconstruction had apparently led to the suppression of certain historical accounts, particularly those involving irregular warfare or civilian casualties. The possibility that her map documented a historically suppressed battle added layers of potential significance beyond monetary value. Historical scholars would be intensely interested in original documentation of previously unknown Civil War engagements. Military historians, battlefield archaeologists, and Civil War researchers represented communities that valued such discoveries enormously. After work, Maria stopped at the hardware store to purchase basic household supplies and tools for beginning ranch maintenance. Owner Pete Davidson, a friendly man in his 60s, proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the Hartwell property's history. The Hartwells were good people, he told her, while loading cleaning supplies and light bulbs into her car. Old man, Hartwell served in Vietnam, came back and worked that ranch for 40 years. His daddy bought the place in the 1940s, and the family had been there ever since. Shame they lost it to medical bills. Davidson's comments reinforced Maria's sense that she had inherited more than property. She had become custodian of a place with deep family roots and community connections. The responsibility felt both honoring and daunting, particularly given her discovery of historical materials that the previous owners had apparently preserved carefully. That evening, as the children played in their vast backyard, while Maria prepared dinner in her own kitchen for the first time in months, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The obstacles that had seemed insurmountable just days earlier had been transformed into stepping stones towards stability and hope. Her children were thriving, her housing situation was permanently resolved, and she had discovered something that might provide additional financial security. The historical map lay spread across the kitchen table as she researched similar documents' values online. Authentic Civil War battlefield maps sold at auction for anywhere from several thousand to over $50,000, depending on their rarity, condition, and historical significance. Even conservative estimates suggested her discovery represented Substantial value, enough to fund major ranch improvements or college savings for her children. More intriguingly, she discovered references to National Archives programs for preserving historically significant documents found in private collections. The government agency collaborated with property owners to ensure important historical materials received proper preservation while acknowledging ownership rights. Such partnerships often resulted in financial compensation for owners while guaranteeing historical preservation. Wednesday brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. Maria was feeding chickens she had purchased the day before, another step toward ranch self-sufficiency, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Santos, this is Dr. Patricia Henley from the University of Texas Department of History. I understand you may have discovered some interesting historical materials at your recently purchased property." Maria's heart rate accelerated immediately. She had shared news of her discovery with no one except her basic internet research, yet somehow academic attention had found her within days. "I'm sorry, Dr. Henley, but I'm not sure how you learned about my property or what materials you're referring to. Please forgive the unexpected contact. A colleague at the State Historical Commission mentioned your recent property purchase and suggested you might benefit from historical consultation services. We often assist private landowners in evaluating and preserving significant historical materials." The explanation seemed plausible, but left Maria uneasy about how quickly her private research had attracted professional attention. She had been careful to avoid specific details in her online searches, yet academic historians had somehow identified her as possessing materials of potential interest. "I appreciate your offer, Dr. Henley, but I'm still settling into the property and haven't had time to properly inventory everything that might be historically relevant." Of course, completely understandable. However, if you have discovered any documents relating to Civil War military activity in your area, I should mention that such materials often require special preservation protocols to prevent deterioration. Time can be critical for maintaining historical integrity. The subtle pressure in Dr. Henley's tone triggered Maria's protective instincts. Having fought for months to maintain custody of her children and secure stable housing, she had developed acute sensitivity to anyone attempting to rush her into decisions without adequate information. "I'll certainly keep your contact information for future reference," Maria replied diplomatically. "Thank you for reaching out." After ending the call, Maria felt a chill of apprehension about the speed with which outside interest had materialized. She had been naive to assume her internet research would remain private, or that her discovery could be evaluated quietly without attracting attention from academic and potentially government sources. That afternoon brought another surprise visitor. A black sedan with government plates pulled into her driveway. While Maria was working in the vegetable garden she had begun planning, a woman in a business suit emerged, approaching with the confident stride of someone accustomed to official authority. "Mrs. Santos, I'm Rebecca Chen from the National Archives Regional Office in Austin. I understand you may have discovered materials of potential historical significance that fall within our preservation mandate." Maria set down her gardening tools, brushing dirt from her hands while processing this second unexpected contact in a single day. The coordination between academic and government interest suggested a level of surveillance or information sharing that made her uncomfortable. "Ms. Chen, I'm curious how the National Archives learned about my property or any materials I might have found. I've spoken with no one about specific discoveries." Chen smiled professionally, consulting a tablet as she spoke. "Property transfers involving historically significant locations are routinely monitored by our office. The Hartwell Ranch property appears in our database due to previous research inquiries about Civil War activity in this region. The explanation felt incomplete, but revealed that Maria's property had been under some form of official observation before her purchase. The previous owner's historical research had apparently attracted government attention, making her recent acquisition of particular interest to federal agencies. "I'd be happy to schedule a time to discuss our historical preservation programs," Chen continued. "We offer excellent compensation for materials that meet federal historical significance criteria, along with professional preservation services that ensure documents remain available for future research." Maria noticed that Chen's offer focused on compensation and preservation, while carefully avoiding any mention of ownership or her rights as property owner. The National Archives representative seemed to assume that federal agencies held superior claims to historical materials regardless of private property rights. "I appreciate your interest, Ms. Chen, but I'm still familiarizing myself with everything on the property. I'll contact your office if I discover anything that might be relevant to your programs." Chen's professional demeanor shifted slightly, revealing traces of impatience beneath her diplomatic surface. "Mrs. Santos, I should mention that certain types of historical materials, particularly those relating to military activities, may be subject to federal oversight regardless of where they're discovered. It's always preferable to resolve such matters cooperatively rather than through formal legal processes." The veiled threat was unmistakable. Chen was suggesting that Maria's property rights might be subordinate to federal claims on historical materials, particularly those with military significance. The implication that formal legal processes might be necessary introduced an element of intimidation that made Maria's protective instincts flare. "I understand your position, Ms. Chen. As I mentioned, I'll contact your office if I discover anything relevant to federal programs." After Chen departed, Maria felt her sanctuary had been invaded by forces beyond her control. The ranch that had represented security and independence suddenly felt exposed to outside interests that might challenge her ownership and autonomy. The historical discovery that had seemed like a blessing was beginning to feel like a potential threat to the stability she had fought so hard to achieve. That evening, as she tucked Sofia and Diego into their beds in their own bedrooms, Maria reflected on how quickly their situation had become complicated. The children remained blissfully unaware of the growing attention their new home was attracting, chattering excitedly about their upcoming school presentations, about our ranch, and their plans for exploring the vast property. Maria made a decision that night that would define everything that followed. Rather than allowing outside pressure to dictate her choices, she would take proactive steps to understand and protect both her property rights and her historical discovery. The map and related documents represented not just potential financial value, but a piece of American history that deserved careful consideration rather than hasty decisions driven by academic ambition or government bureaucracy. She would research her legal rights thoroughly, consult with attorneys who specialized in property and historical preservation law, and ensure that any decisions about the Civil War materials served her family's interests first. The custody hearing remained her primary concern, but the historical discovery offered possibilities for long-term security that could transform their lives if handled properly. The next morning, Maria called Andrew Whitfield, an attorney whose name she had found through the Texas Bar Association's referral service. Whitfield specialized in property rights and had experience with historical preservation law, making him ideal for her complex situation. "Mrs. Santos, you're absolutely correct to seek legal counsel before allowing any government agency access to materials found on your property," Whitfield assured her during their initial phone consultation. "Federal agencies often overstep their authority when dealing with private property owners who don't understand their rights." The conversation provided Maria with the confidence she needed to resist external pressure while properly evaluating her options. Whitfield agreed to research the specific legal framework governing historical materials found on private property, ensuring that Maria understood both her rights and any legitimate obligations she might face. As she prepared for another day at the diner, followed by an evening of research and planning, Maria felt a renewed sense of determination. The challenges ahead were complex, but they were also opportunities. She had transformed homelessness into property ownership through courage and determination. Now she would apply those same qualities to protecting her family's interests, while honoring the historical significance of what she had discovered. The Civil War map that had initially seemed like an unexpected blessing was becoming a test of her resolve and resourcefulness. But Maria Santos had already proven that desperate circumstances could be transformed into remarkable opportunities through careful planning, hard work, and unwavering commitment to her children's future. The battle for her family's security and the preservation of historical truth was just beginning. But Maria approached it with the same fierce determination that had carried them from a motel room to their own ranch in less than a week. Whatever came next, they would face it together on their own land, with their own home as their fortress. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source 3 days later. Maria was researching property law in the ranch's makeshift office when Sophia burst through the door, breathless with excitement from her after-school exploration of the property. "Mom, you have to see what Diego found in the old barn. There's a secret room behind the hay storage, and it has more old papers and maps and stuff." Maria's heart skipped as she followed her daughter toward the barn, where Diego stood proudly beside what appeared to be a concealed entrance he had discovered while playing hide-and-seek. Behind several hay bales, a narrow door led to a climate-controlled storage room that had been completely hidden from casual observation. Inside the concealed chamber, Maria discovered an archive that took her breath away. Dozens of Civil War era documents, photographs, maps, and artifacts were carefully preserved in protective cases. But more significantly, she found a leather journal belonging to Colonel James Hartwell, dated 1863, detailing his role as a Union intelligence officer who had conducted secret operations behind Confederate lines. The journal revealed that the Battle of Mill Creek Crossing had indeed occurred, but as a covert operation designed to appear as a routine skirmish while Union forces secured vital intelligence about Confederate supply routes. Colonel Hartwell had documented not just the battle itself, but the location of a hidden Confederate supply depot that had never been discovered by historians. Most remarkably, the journal contained detailed maps showing the precise location of buried Confederate gold and military supplies, hidden by retreating forces who planned to return after the war ended. The coordinates placed this treasure cache directly beneath what was now Maria's property, buried near the foundation stones she had noticed during her initial exploration. As Maria photographed each page with trembling hands, she realized she had discovered something that transcended mere historical significance. This was potentially one of the most important Civil War archaeological sites in Texas, containing both documented historical evidence and actual buried artifacts that could revolutionize understanding of secret military operations during the conflict. The implications were staggering. The treasure cache alone, if it truly existed, could represent millions of dollars in historical artifacts, gold, and military equipment. But the intelligence documents and operational records might be even more valuable to historians seeking to understand covert activities that had been classified for over 150 years. That evening, as the children slept peacefully in their own beds, Maria spread the journal and maps across her kitchen table, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with such an extraordinary discovery. She wasn't just the owner of a ranch anymore. She was the custodian of potentially the most significant Civil War archaeological site in the region. Her phone rang at 8:47 p.m. with a call from Attorney Whitfield, who had been researching her legal position regarding historical materials found on private property. "Mrs. Santos, I have excellent news about your legal rights. Texas property law is very clear that historical artifacts discovered on private land belong to the property owner, not to government agencies. The National Archives has no authority to seize materials from your property without a court order, which they would be unlikely to obtain given the circumstances of your discovery." The legal clarity provided Maria with confidence to proceed on her own terms rather than yielding to pressure from academic or government sources. She owned these materials outright, along with any buried artifacts that might exist on her property. "However," Whitfield continued, "I should mention that your situation has attracted attention beyond what you might expect. My research revealed that the National Archives has been searching for Colonel Hartwell's operational records for decades. These documents represent some of the last undiscovered Union intelligence archives from the Civil War period. The revelation explained the rapid response from both academic and government sources. Maria's discovery wasn't just historically significant, it was the missing piece of a puzzle that researchers had been trying to solve for generations. "What does this mean for my family's security and our ability to benefit from this discovery?" Maria asked, her protective instincts focused on ensuring that her children's future remained her priority. "It means you're in a very strong negotiating position," Whitfield replied. "These materials are extraordinarily valuable, and you have complete control over how they're handled. I recommend we schedule a meeting with all interested parties and establish terms that serve your interests while acknowledging the historical importance of your discovery." The following morning brought a parade of phone calls from universities, museums, historical societies, and government agencies, all requesting immediate access to Maria's discovery. Word had somehow leaked, despite her efforts at discretion, creating a feeding frenzy of academic and institutional interest that threatened to overwhelm her small family's peaceful existence. Dr. Patricia Henley called again, this time with a university consortium offering to purchase the entire collection for $750,000, contingent upon immediate transfer to academic custody. The Archaeological Institute of America followed with an offer of $2 million plus ongoing royalties for any published research based on the materials. Most significantly, Rebecca Chen from the National Archives returned to the ranch with a federal task force, including representatives from the Smithsonian Institution, the Library of Congress, and the Department of Defense. Their proposal involved designating the property as a National Historic Site, providing Maria with $3 million in compensation while ensuring permanent preservation of both the documents and any buried artifacts. "Mrs. Santos," Chen explained, as the federal team gathered in Maria's living room, "what you've discovered represents one of the most significant archaeological and historical finds of the 21st century. Colonel Hartwell's intelligence operations were so classified that even military historians had no knowledge of their scope until now." The Defense Department representative, Colonel Martinez, added context that revealed the true scope of Maria's discovery. Colonel Hartwell was essentially running a Civil War-era CIA operation, gathering intelligence that influenced major strategic decisions by the Union command. His operational records fill crucial gaps in our understanding of how modern intelligence warfare evolved. Maria listened carefully to each proposal while maintaining her focus on what mattered most: her children's security and their future on the ranch that had become their sanctuary. The offers were substantial, but she recognized that hasty decisions could result in losing control over both the discovery and their new home. "I appreciate all of your offers," she told the assembled representatives, "but I need time to consider what's best for my family while honoring the historical significance of these materials." That afternoon, as government vehicles departed, and her phone continued ringing with additional offers, Maria made a decision that would define not just her family's future, but how one of America's most important historical discoveries would be preserved and shared. She called a press conference. Working with attorney Whitfield and a public relations specialist he recommended, Maria announced her discovery to local and national media, ensuring that the story reached the public before any single institution could claim exclusive control. The strategy transformed her from a private property owner being pressured by powerful institutions into a public figure advocating for responsible historical preservation. The press conference, held on the ranch's front porch with the sweeping landscape as backdrop, generated national attention that changed everything. Maria's story resonated far beyond academic circles. A single mother who had risked everything to provide housing for her children, only to discover one of the most significant archaeological sites in American history. "I believe these materials belong not to any single institution, but to the American people," Maria told the assembled reporters. "My goal is to ensure they're preserved and made accessible, while providing my family with the security we've worked so hard to achieve." The public response was overwhelming. Within hours, Maria received calls from documentary filmmakers, book publishers, and educational organizations offering partnerships that would generate ongoing income while maintaining her control over the materials and property. Most importantly, the publicity attracted support from historical preservation organizations and legal advocacy groups that helped level the playing field between Maria and the powerful institutions seeking to acquire her discovery. The breakthrough came when the National Geographic Society proposed a partnership that addressed everyone's interests. They would fund a complete archaeological excavation of the property, professionally document and preserve all discoveries, and create educational programs that would make the materials accessible worldwide. Maria would retain ownership of both the property and all discoveries while receiving substantial compensation and ongoing royalties. The excavation began 2 months later, transforming the ranch into a carefully managed archaeological site. Using ground-penetrating radar and metal detection equipment, researchers located the exact position of the Confederate supply depot described in Colonel Hartwell's journal. The day they opened the buried cache, Maria stood with Sophia and Diego, as archaeologists carefully removed artifacts that had been hidden for over 150 years. Confederate gold coins, military equipment, weapons, documents, and personal effects emerged from the Texas soil like pieces of a time capsule that brought history vividly to life. The children's excitement was infectious as they watched history being literally unearthed in their backyard. Diego appointed himself the official documenter, taking photographs of each discovery with the digital camera the research team had given him. Sophia conducted interviews with archaeologists, creating her own documentary about the treasure in our yard. The custody hearing that had once terrified Maria became a celebration of her success in providing extraordinary stability and opportunity for her children. The judge commended her resourcefulness and determination, while noting that few children had the opportunity to grow up on a nationally significant historical site. Her ex-husband's attempt to gain custody collapsed entirely when faced with evidence of Maria's property ownership, stable income from the historical partnership, and the children's obvious happiness in their new environment. The court awarded Maria full custody with minimal visitation rights for their father, who had contributed nothing to their support during the months of struggle. 6 months after the initial discovery, Hartwell Ranch had been transformed into a model for how private property owners and historical institutions could collaborate for mutual benefit. The main house remained the Santos family's private residence, while portions of the property served as an active archaeological research site and educational center. The financial benefits exceeded Maria's most optimistic projections. The National Geographic Partnership provided an initial payment of $5 million, with ongoing royalties from educational materials, documentaries, and research publications. Additional income came from carefully managed tourism, corporate partnerships, and licensing agreements for artifacts and reproductions. More significantly, Maria had established the Hartwell Historical Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting single mothers facing housing instability while promoting historical education in underserved communities. The foundation's first project involved purchasing and renovating foreclosed properties to provide affordable housing for families in crisis. Sophia and Diego thrived in ways that went far beyond material security. Sophia developed a passion for archaeology and history, working alongside professional researchers and earning recognition for her contributions to the excavation documentation. Diego's natural curiosity found perfect expression in the ongoing discovery process as new artifacts and historical evidence continued emerging from the site. The ranch itself became a living classroom, where children from across the region came to learn about Civil War history, archaeological methods, and the importance of preserving historical heritage. Maria often served as a guide, sharing her story of how desperate circumstances had led to extraordinary discovery. 1 year after her $650 purchase at the foreclosure auction, Maria stood in the same courthouse where she had become a property owner, this time receiving a Community Service Award from the Texas Historical Commission. The ceremony recognized her role in preserving and sharing one of the state's most significant historical discoveries. Mrs. Santos represents the best of American values, the presenter noted. Through courage, determination, and commitment to serving something larger than herself, she has transformed personal struggle into national treasure. As Maria accepted the award, she thought about the journey that had brought her family from a motel room to international recognition. The foreclosed ranch that had represented her last desperate option had become the foundation for security, purpose, and contribution that extended far beyond her original dreams. The evening celebration continued at the ranch, where friends, neighbors, researchers, and officials gathered to honor not just Maria's discovery, but her vision for how historical preservation could serve community needs. Children ran across the same pasture land where Confederate soldiers had once hidden treasure, now playing freely on land that belonged to a family that had transformed adversity into triumph. Dr. Patricia Henley, who had become both collaborator and friend despite their initial tension, offered a toast that captured the significance of Maria's achievement. To Maria Santos, who proved that sometimes the most important discoveries come not from academic research or government expeditions, but from ordinary people willing to take extraordinary risks for their families. As the celebration continued, under a canopy of Texas stars, Maria reflected on how profoundly her life had changed since that desperate morning when she had bid on abandoned ranch property. The Civil War map that had seemed like an unexpected blessing had become the catalyst for transformation that touched thousands of lives beyond her own. Sophia and Diego fell asleep that night in bedrooms that were truly their own, on land that would always be their family's heritage, surrounded by historical significance that made their daily lives part of America's ongoing story. The security Maria had sought through property ownership had evolved into something far more meaningful: the knowledge that their family's struggles had contributed to preserving and sharing important historical truth. The woman, who had once counted dollars to afford another night in a motel, now managed resources that would ensure her children's college education, her community's historical preservation, and ongoing support for other families facing similar challenges. The transformation proved that even the most desperate circumstances could lead to extraordinary outcomes when met with courage, determination, and willingness to see possibilities where others saw only problems. Maria's story became an inspiration, shared in schools, churches, and community centers across Texas and beyond, demonstrating that American dreams remained achievable for those brave enough to risk everything for the chance at something better. The foreclosed ranch with buried treasure had given the Santos family not just financial security, but the profound satisfaction of knowing their struggles had contributed to something larger and more lasting than they had ever dared to imagine. 2 years after her life-changing discovery, Maria Santos found herself standing before the United States Congress, invited to testify about how historical preservation could drive economic development in rural communities. The woman who had once counted her last dollars in a motel room now addressed lawmakers about policy initiatives that could transform how America approached both historical heritage and affordable housing. "Honorable representatives," Maria began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "when I purchased Hartwell Ranch for $650, I was simply trying to keep my children from becoming homeless. I never imagined that desperation could lead to discoveries that would benefit our entire nation's understanding of its history." The testimony had been requested by the House Subcommittee on Historic Preservation, which was developing legislation to support private property owners who discovered historically significant materials. Maria's success story had become a model for how individual initiative and institutional cooperation could create outcomes that served both personal and public interests. The Hartwell model demonstrates that ordinary Americans, when given proper support and legal protection, can become extraordinary stewards of our national heritage, she continued, glancing at the gallery where Sophia and Diego sat with their grandmother, beaming with pride at their mother's achievement. The children had grown remarkably in the 2 years since their lives had been transformed. Sophia, now 10, had been accepted into a prestigious summer program for young archaeologists at the Smithsonian Institution, where her work documenting the Hartwell site had impressed professional researchers. Diego, 7, had become something of a celebrity among Civil War historians for his uncanny ability to locate buried artifacts during excavations. More significantly, both children had developed a profound sense of purpose that extended far beyond their material circumstances. They understood that their family's struggle and discovery had created opportunities for other families facing similar challenges, and they embraced their roles as young ambassadors for historical preservation and community service. The congressional testimony represented the culmination of Maria's evolution from desperate property buyer to national advocate for innovative approaches to historical preservation. The Hartwell Historical Foundation had grown from a small local initiative into a nationally recognized organization that had helped over 300 families transition from housing instability to home ownership through creative partnerships with historical societies and preservation groups. Representatives, I want to share with you the story of Jennifer Martinez, a widow in New Mexico who used our foundation's model to purchase a foreclosed property that turned out to contain Native American pottery. Dating back 800 years, Maria told the assembled lawmakers. Like me, Jennifer was facing homelessness with her children. Today, she's working with tribal historians and university researchers to preserve and interpret her discovery while providing cultural education programs that employ dozens of community members. The Foundation's success stories had multiplied across the country as Maria and her team refined their approach to identifying undervalued properties with potential historical significance. They had developed partnerships with geological surveys, historical societies, and archaeological organizations that helped single mothers and struggling families locate properties that might contain hidden historical treasures. The strategy worked because it addressed multiple societal needs simultaneously. Families gained affordable housing and potential financial security, communities preserved important historical heritage, and academic institutions gained access to previously unknown historical materials. The collaborative approach had proven more effective than traditional government programs or purely academic initiatives. Our foundation has facilitated the discovery of Revolutionary War artifacts in Virginia, Native American burial sites in Oklahoma, and Underground Railroad stations in Ohio, Maria continued her testimony. In each case, families who were facing housing crises have become custodians of nationally significant historical sites while achieving financial stability that seemed impossible just months earlier. The congressional audience listened with obvious fascination as Maria described how desperate circumstances had led to systematic innovation in historical preservation. The Foundation's success had attracted attention from international preservation organizations, leading to consulting partnerships that were helping other countries develop similar programs. Following her testimony, Maria was approached by representatives from the United Nations, educational, scientific, and cultural organization, who invited her to speak at an international conference on community-based historical preservation. The girl who had once feared losing custody of her children was now being recognized as a global innovator in sustainable heritage management. The flight back to Texas gave Maria time to reflect on how profoundly her perspective had evolved since that desperate morning at the foreclosure auction. She no longer thought primarily about her family's security, which was now permanently established, but about how their experience could continue creating opportunities for others facing similar challenges. The ranch itself had been transformed into something far beyond what she had originally envisioned. The main house remained their family residence, but additional structures had been built to accommodate the various programs and activities that now took place on the property. The Hartwell Research Center housed ongoing archaeological work, while the Education Center provided classrooms and laboratory space for student programs. Most meaningfully to Maria, the ranch had become a destination for families considering participation in the Foundation's programs. Prospective participants could see firsthand how determination and strategic thinking could transform desperate circumstances into extraordinary opportunities. The success stories they witnessed provided inspiration and practical guidance for their own journeys. Sophia and Diego had embraced their roles as junior ambassadors for the Foundation's mission. Sophia frequently spoke at schools and community centers about how archaeological discovery had changed her family's life, while Diego led tours of the excavation sites for visiting children. Their presentations always emphasized that success had come not from luck, but from their mother's courage in taking calculated risks when facing impossible circumstances. The children's education had evolved far beyond traditional schooling. They learned history by participating in archaeological research, developed scientific skills by working alongside university researchers, and gained business knowledge by observing the Foundation's operations. Their unique educational experience was attracting attention from educational innovators interested in how real-world application could enhance traditional academic curricula. "Mom," Sophia said during the flight home from Washington, "Mrs. Chen from the Smithsonian asked if I wanted to spend next summer helping with excavations in Peru. She says I have natural instincts for archaeological fieldwork." The opportunity represented exactly the kind of possibility that Maria had hoped her children might eventually access, but far sooner than she had imagined. Sophia's passion for archaeology had been nurtured by direct involvement in significant discoveries, providing her with experience and connections that would have been impossible through conventional educational paths. "What do you think about spending a summer in Peru?" Maria asked, recognizing that her daughter was developing independence and expertise that would soon take her far beyond the Texas ranch where their transformation had begun. "I want to go, but I also want to keep helping with our foundation's families," Sophia replied thoughtfully. "Maybe I could document how archaeological discoveries happen in different countries and share that with kids whose families are just starting their preservation projects." The response demonstrated how thoroughly Sophia had internalized the Foundation's mission of using personal success to create opportunities for others. Her interest in international archaeology was balanced by commitment to continuing the work that had grown from their family's experience. Diego's interests had evolved differently, but with equal sophistication. His natural ability to locate buried artifacts had led to collaborations with metal detection technology companies who were developing equipment specifically designed for educational and archaeological applications. At 7 years old, he was already contributing to technological innovation while maintaining the playful enthusiasm that made him an effective ambassador for the Foundation's youth programs. Back at the ranch, Maria found a stack of applications from families interested in the Foundation's latest initiative, a partnership with the National Park Service to identify privately owned properties adjacent to historical sites that might contain related archaeological materials. The program would help families purchase undervalued land while extending the boundaries of existing historical preservation areas. Among the applications was a letter from a single father in Montana whose job loss had left him facing eviction. With 3 young children, his research had identified a foreclosed property near Little Bighorn Battlefield that might contain artifacts from the famous 1876 engagement. The Foundation's assistance would enable him to purchase the property while potentially making a discovery that could provide long-term financial security for his family. Another application came from a divorced mother in Georgia who had identified a plantation property with potential Underground Railroad connections. Her background as a social worker had given her insights into how historical education programs could address contemporary social justice issues while providing economic opportunities for underserved communities. Each application represented both an opportunity and a responsibility. Maria understood that the Foundation's success had created expectations and obligations that extended far beyond her original goal of providing housing security for her own children. Families across the country were looking to the Hartwell model as a pathway out of desperate circumstances requiring careful evaluation and support to ensure positive outcomes. The Foundation's screening process had become increasingly sophisticated as applications multiplied. Maria worked with historians, archaeologists, geologists, and legal experts to evaluate properties for both historical potential and practical viability as family residences. The goal was identifying situations where families could achieve housing stability while contributing to historical preservation, avoiding projects that might leave participants in worse circumstances than when they started. Mrs. Santos called Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the Foundation's newly hired program director, as Maria reviewed applications in her ranch office. "I have exciting news about the Peterson family in Colorado. The property they purchased through our program has yielded Native American artifacts that the local tribal council wants to preserve through a cultural center partnership." The Peterson family's success represented the Foundation's 127th successful placement, each one creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate participants. Their discovery had led to collaboration with tribal historians, employment opportunities for community members, and educational programs that were bringing visitors to a previously economically depressed rural area. The Tribal Council is offering the Petersons a long-term management contract for the cultural center, plus royalties from educational materials and tourism, Dr. Martinez continued. It's exactly the kind of sustainable outcome we hope to achieve with every placement. These success stories had attracted attention from venture capital firms interested in scaling the foundation's model into a larger social enterprise. Maria had received offers to franchise the approach or accept investment funding that would enable rapid expansion across multiple states simultaneously. However, she had decided to maintain controlled growth that prioritized quality outcomes over quantity of placements. Each family's success required careful attention and ongoing support, making rapid scaling potentially counterproductive to the Foundation's core mission of transforming desperate circumstances into sustainable opportunities. The decision to prioritize depth over breadth had proven wise, as the Foundation's reputation for consistent success attracted higher quality partnerships and more significant funding opportunities. Major foundations, corporations, and government agencies now competed to collaborate with the Hartwell Foundation, recognizing that its track record of positive outcomes made it an ideal partner for innovative preservation initiatives. Maria's personal life had also evolved in unexpected directions. The demands of managing a growing foundation while maintaining her family's ranch-based lifestyle had created challenges, but also opportunities for personal growth that extended far beyond her original dreams of simple housing stability. She had completed a master's degree in public administration through a program designed for working professionals, developing expertise in non-profit management, policy development, and community organizing. The education had been funded through scholarships provided by universities that wanted to support her innovative work in historical preservation. More personally, Maria had begun dating David Whitfield, Attorney Whitfield's younger brother, who worked as a documentary filmmaker specializing in historical subjects. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared interests in historical preservation and community development rather than romantic urgency. David's understanding of both legal and media aspects of historical work made him an ideal partner for someone whose life revolved around managing complex preservation projects. The children had embraced David's presence in their lives with characteristic enthusiasm. He brought skills in photography and videography that enhanced their documentation work, while his easygoing personality complemented Maria's more intense focus on achievement and security. Most importantly, he understood that the children's needs and the Foundation's mission would always be Maria's primary priorities. "Maria," David said one evening as they reviewed footage from the latest excavation, "I've been thinking about how we could document the Foundation's impact through a feature-length documentary. The individual family stories are compelling, but the broader social implications might reach even larger audiences." The suggestion represented another potential expansion of the Foundation's influence, but also raised questions about maintaining privacy and avoiding exploitation of participating families' personal circumstances. Maria had learned to be cautious about media attention, recognizing that sensationalism could undermine the Foundation's credibility while potentially exposing vulnerable families to unwanted scrutiny. "I like the idea, but we'd need complete control over how families are portrayed," Maria replied. "These are real people facing genuine challenges, not entertainment content for audiences looking for inspiration without understanding the complexity of housing instability and historical preservation work." The conversation reflected how thoroughly Maria's perspective had evolved since her own desperate circumstances had thrust her into public attention. She now understood the responsibility that came with representing both successful outcomes and ongoing challenges, requiring careful balance between inspiring hope and maintaining realistic expectations about the hard work required for transformation. As autumn arrived at Hartwell Ranch, bringing the brilliant colors that made Texas landscapes so compelling, Maria stood in the same spot where she had first explored her $650 property purchase 2 years earlier. The view now included research buildings, educational facilities, and ongoing excavation sites that buzzed with activity from dawn until dusk. Sophia and Diego played in the same oak grove, where Confederate soldiers had once buried treasure, but now their games involved teaching visiting children about archaeological methods and historical research techniques. Their transformation from homeless motel residents to confident young ambassadors for historical preservation seemed almost impossible to believe, yet represented just one example of the changes the Foundation had facilitated across the country. The financial security that had once seemed impossible was now simply background to more meaningful concerns about how their family's experience could continue creating opportunities for others. Maria's monthly foundation salary provided comfortable living, while royalties from the historical discovery ensured long-term financial independence. More significantly, the work provided daily purpose that connected personal fulfillment with service to others facing similar challenges. That evening, as Maria tucked her children into beds in bedrooms that would always be theirs, she reflected on the journey that had brought them from desperation to national recognition. The foreclosed ranch that had represented her last hope had become the foundation for achievements that extended far beyond her most ambitious original dreams. The story continued to evolve as new families joined the Foundation's programs, each bringing their own circumstances and potential for transformation. Maria's role had expanded from desperate property buyer to national advocate, but the core mission remained unchanged, proving that American families, when given appropriate support and opportunity, could overcome seemingly impossible circumstances while contributing to the preservation of national heritage. Tomorrow would bring new applications, new challenges, and new possibilities for families ready to risk everything for the chance at something better. Maria Santos, who had once bet her last dollars on abandoned ranch property, now helped others make similar calculated risks with much greater chances of success, ensuring that her family's transformation became a catalyst for change that would benefit generations to come. 5 years after her desperate bid on Hartwell Ranch, Maria Santos received a phone call that would once again transform her understanding of what was possible. The caller introduced herself as Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, but her message transcended typical academic collaboration. Mrs. Santos, we've been monitoring the global impact of the Hartwell Foundation's methodology, and we'd like to propose something unprecedented. The Smithsonian wants to establish the first international center for community-based historical preservation, and we want you to serve as its founding director. The offer represented a quantum leap from managing a successful non-profit to leading a global initiative that would influence how nations approached historical preservation while addressing housing insecurity. The position would require relocating to Washington, D.C., establishing international partnerships and developing programs that could be adapted across diverse cultural and economic contexts worldwide. Dr. Vasquez, I'm honored by the offer, but my children and I have built our lives around the ranch. Leaving Texas would mean abandoning the community that supported us when we had nothing. Actually, Mrs. Santos, we've designed this position specifically around your unique situation. The International Center would maintain primary operations in Texas with satellite offices worldwide. Your ranch would become the flagship demonstration site, while your children could contribute to international youth programs that connect historical preservation with education. The conversation continued for over an hour as Dr. Vasquez outlined a vision that would amplify everything Maria had learned about transforming desperate circumstances into opportunities for systematic change. The Smithsonian had studied the Hartwell Foundation's methodology and concluded that its success principles could be adapted to address housing instability and cultural preservation challenges in dozens of countries. Sophia, now 12, had been accepted into an accelerated program at the University of Texas that would allow her to complete high school while pursuing undergraduate coursework in archaeology and anthropology. Her work documenting the Hartwell excavations had resulted in peer-reviewed publications that established her as the youngest contributor to professional archaeological journals in American history. "Mom," Sophia said that evening as they discussed the Smithsonian opportunity over dinner, "this could help families all over the world. Remember when we visited that conference in Mexico City and met the woman whose family had discovered Aztec artifacts? She was doing exactly what we did, but without any support system." Diego, now 9, had developed his metal detection skills into a consulting business that helped historical societies and museums train young people in archaeological survey techniques. His combination of natural talent and infectious enthusiasm had made him a sought-after speaker at educational conferences, where his presentations about finding history in your backyard inspired children to engage with historical preservation. "I think we should do it," Diego announced with characteristic directness. "We could help kids in other countries find treasures like we did, and they could teach their parents how to buy houses and start foundations too." The children's perspectives reflected how thoroughly they had internalized the Foundation's mission while developing their own visions for expanding its impact. Their experiences had taught them that individual transformation could create ripple effects that extended far beyond immediate circumstances, and they were eager to apply those lessons on an international scale. Maria spent the following weeks researching the global scope of housing instability and cultural heritage preservation challenges. The statistics were sobering. Over 100 million people worldwide lived in inadequate housing, while countless historical sites and artifacts faced destruction due to economic pressures and lack of preservation resources. The Smithsonian's proposal offered a framework for addressing both problems simultaneously by adapting the Hartwell model to diverse international contexts. The center would provide training, funding, and technical assistance to help families in different countries identify undervalued properties with historical significance while building local capacity for sustainable preservation programs. Attorney David Whitfield, who had become Maria's husband the previous year in a ceremony held in the Oak Grove, where the Confederate treasure had been discovered, brought legal expertise that proved crucial in evaluating the international opportunity. His analysis revealed that the Smithsonian partnership would provide unprecedented resources, while maintaining the autonomy that had made the Hartwell Foundation successful. "Maria, this isn't just about expanding your work," David explained, as they reviewed partnership documents. "The Smithsonian is essentially proposing to institutionalize your methodology as a new field of study. You'd be establishing academic and policy frameworks that could influence international development." For decades, the marriage had strengthened rather than complicated Maria's commitment to the Foundation's mission. David's background in documentary filmmaking and legal advocacy complemented her operational expertise, while his understanding of media and policy amplified the Foundation's influence. Most importantly, he had embraced his role as stepfather to Sophia and Diego with genuine enthusiasm, supporting their individual development while contributing to their family's shared commitment to service. The decision to accept the Smithsonian partnership required careful consideration of how international responsibilities would affect the Foundation's existing programs and the families already participating in its initiatives. Maria was determined to avoid the common non-profit mistake of expanding too rapidly while neglecting core constituencies. "I'll accept the position," she told Dr. Vasquez during a follow-up call, "but only if we can ensure that our existing Foundation operations continue without disruption. The families we're already serving must remain our priority, even as we develop international programs." The Smithsonian's response exceeded Maria's expectations. Rather than viewing the existing foundation as a constraint, they proposed integrating it as the center's primary training and demonstration facility. Families from around the world would come to Hartwell Ranch to observe successful preservation projects, while learning methodologies they could adapt to their own cultural and economic contexts. The announcement of the International Center for Community-Based Historical Preservation generated global media attention that transformed Maria from a national figure into an international symbol of innovative social entrepreneurship. News organizations from 6 continents requested interviews, while government officials from dozens of countries inquired about establishing partnership programs. The most meaningful response came from families who had heard about the Hartwell model through international media coverage and were organizing grassroots preservation initiatives in their own communities. A group of displaced families in Syria had identified Ottoman-era ruins that could be preserved through collaborative archaeological projects. Indigenous communities in Bolivia were using similar strategies to protect ancestral sites while developing sustainable tourism programs. "Mrs. Santos," said Carmen Rodriguez, a participant in the Foundation's program who had discovered Spanish colonial artifacts on her property in Arizona, "When I was facing eviction last year, I never imagined that buying that abandoned hacienda would connect me to families in Guatemala who are doing the same thing with Mayan sites." The international connections were creating networks of mutual support that extended far beyond formal program structures. Participating families were sharing experiences, resources, and encouragement across national boundaries, building global communities united by shared commitment to transforming adversity into opportunity while preserving cultural heritage. Sophia's role in the International Center involved developing youth programs that connected young people from different countries through collaborative historical research projects. Her first initiative paired American children participating in Foundation programs with peers in Ireland who were documenting famine-era archaeological sites, creating cross-cultural learning experiences that enriched both groups' understanding of historical migration and preservation. It's amazing how kids from completely different backgrounds can work together when they're excited about discovering history, Sophia explained during a video conference with program participants. "The Irish kids know so much about research methods we haven't tried, and we can share techniques we've learned from working with Native American archaeologists." Diego's international contributions focused on developing accessible archaeological survey techniques that could be taught to children regardless of their technological resources or formal education levels. His workshops emphasized observation, documentation, and careful excavation methods that required minimal equipment while producing professional quality results. The first international delegation visited Hartwell Ranch 6 months after the center's establishment, bringing together families from 12 countries who were implementing community-based preservation programs in diverse cultural contexts. The week-long intensive program combined practical training with cultural exchange that created lasting partnerships between participants. Seeing families from Kenya, Vietnam, and Peru working together in our oak grove, sharing stories about how they're preserving their own historical sites while achieving housing security, feels like a dream I never would have dared to imagine. Maria reflected during the delegation's final evening gathering. The International Center's success attracted attention from United Nations agencies interested in integrating community-based preservation approaches into global development programs. UNESCO invited Maria to serve on a task force developing new frameworks for cultural heritage preservation that prioritized community ownership and sustainable economic benefits for local populations. The invitation required Maria to travel extensively, presenting the Hartwell model to international audiences while learning about preservation challenges and opportunities in diverse global contexts. Each trip provided insights that strengthened the center's programs, while expanding her understanding of how historical preservation could address multiple social and economic challenges simultaneously. In Bangladesh, Maria worked with communities preserving Mughal-era archaeological sites while developing flood-resistant housing. The families she met had adapted the Hartwell model to address climate change challenges while maintaining cultural continuity through preservation of historical structures and traditional building techniques. In Peru, she collaborated with indigenous communities using archaeological discovery to strengthen land rights claims while developing educational tourism programs that provided sustainable income for village families. The integration of historical preservation with legal advocacy and economic development demonstrated the model's adaptability to complex political and social contexts. Most impactfully, Maria visited refugee camps in Jordan, where displaced Syrian families were documenting their cultural heritage through oral history projects and artifact preservation initiatives. Despite having lost their homes and communities, these families were finding ways to maintain cultural identity while building foundations for eventual reconstruction of their historical sites. Mrs. Santos, said Fatima al-Hassan, a Syrian refugee who had organized heritage preservation workshops in her camp, "Your story gives us hope that we can rebuild not just our homes, but our community's connection to history. When we return to Syria, we want to use your methods to preserve what remains while creating new opportunities for our children." The refugee camp experience profoundly affected Maria's understanding of how historical preservation could serve healing and reconstruction processes in post-conflict situations. The center began developing specialized programs for displaced populations, recognizing that cultural heritage preservation could provide both psychological healing and practical foundations for community rebuilding. Back in Texas, the ranch had been transformed into a complex of educational and research facilities that buzzed with international activity while maintaining its character as a working historical site. The main house remained the Santos family's residence, but additional buildings housed visiting researchers, international fellows, and program participants who came from around the world to learn preservation methodologies. The financial sustainability of the expanded operations required innovative funding strategies that combined traditional grants with social impact investments and earned revenue from educational programs. Maria had learned to navigate complex international funding landscapes while maintaining the center's independence and commitment to serving families facing housing instability. "Mom," Diego said one evening as they watched the sunset from their front porch, "remember when we used to worry about having enough money for another night at the motel? Now we're helping families in 57 different countries." The observation captured the remarkable scope of transformation that had grown from Maria's desperate $650 gamble on abandoned ranch property. What had begun as a survival strategy had evolved into a global movement that was changing how the international community approached both historical preservation and affordable housing challenges. Sophia's graduation from high school at age 14 made international news, not because of her academic acceleration, but because of her plans to spend her gap year before college working with preservation programs in 6 different countries. Her fluency in Spanish and English, combined with her archaeological expertise and foundation experience, made her an ideal cultural ambassador for the center's international initiatives. I want to understand how families in different cultures adapt our model to their specific challenges, Sophia explained to reporters. Every country has unique historical heritage and different approaches to community organization. So I need to learn how preservation can work in various contexts before I can contribute effectively to policy development. The maturity and vision. Sophia reflected the profound impact of growing up within a mission-driven family whose work connected personal experience with service to others. Her childhood immersion in historical preservation and community development had prepared her for leadership roles that few teenagers could imagine, let alone pursue effectively. Diego's interests had evolved toward technological innovation that could make archaeological survey techniques accessible to families with limited resources. His collaboration with engineering students at the University of Texas had resulted in low-cost metal detection and ground-penetrating radar systems that could be manufactured and maintained in developing countries. If kids in rural Guatemala can use the same tools we have here in Texas, they'll find amazing things that nobody even knows exist, Diego explained during a presentation to technology investors. And their families can use those discoveries to build better lives while protecting their heritage. The children's development demonstrated how early exposure to meaningful work could shape young people's aspirations and capabilities in ways that traditional education alone could never achieve. They had learned leadership, cross-cultural communication, and social entrepreneurship through direct participation in projects that created real change in people's lives. As the center's 3rd year of operations concluded, Maria received recognition from the International Association of Community Development Organizations as Global Innovator of the Decade. The award ceremony in Geneva brought together social entrepreneurs, government officials, and community leaders from around the world to celebrate approaches that addressed multiple challenges through integrated solutions. 5 years ago, I was a desperate single mother counting my last dollars in a Texas motel, Maria told the international audience. Today, I'm here because taking risks for our families can create changes that extend far beyond what we initially imagined possible. Every family facing impossible circumstances has the potential to discover solutions that can benefit communities worldwide. The speech received a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, but Maria's attention focused on the audience members who approached afterward with stories of their own transformative discoveries. A widow from Ghana had found traditional textile designs that became the foundation for a women's cooperative. A displaced farmer from Afghanistan had documented traditional agricultural techniques that were being adapted for climate change resilience. Each story reinforced Maria's understanding that the Hartwell model's success came not from any unique circumstances, but from principles that could be applied whenever families facing desperate situations received appropriate support and encouragement to take calculated risks for transformative outcomes. The plane ride back to Texas provided time for reflection on how profoundly her perspective had evolved since that terrifying morning when she had attended her first foreclosure auction. The ranch that had represented her last hope was now headquarters for a global initiative that was helping thousands of families transform their own desperate circumstances into opportunities for service and achievement. As the Texas landscape appeared below, Maria thought about the Confederate soldiers who had buried treasure on her property 160 years earlier. never imagining that their desperate wartime actions would eventually enable a single mother and her children to create opportunities for families worldwide. History's unexpected connections continued to surprise and inspire her, demonstrating that individual actions could create ripple effects across generations and continents. Sophia and Diego were waiting at the Austin airport with David, eager to hear about her experiences in Geneva and ready to share updates about the center's programs. Their enthusiasm for the work that had grown from their family's crisis reflected how completely they had embraced their roles as young leaders in a movement that connected historical preservation with social justice and community development. The drive back to Hartwell Ranch took them past the Sunset Motor Lodge, where their transformation had begun, now closed and scheduled for demolition to make way for affordable housing development funded by the foundation. The symbolic completion of their journey from homelessness to international leadership felt both profound and humbling, reminding Maria that every ending created space for new beginnings. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.